what's interesting about this conversation is you and I have known each other for several years in a professional capacity that became a personal capacity. You were my banker. And
2013, Daniel. Time flies by.
It does fly fast. And I was thinking before this interview, like, who knows you better than your banker? You know, your highs and lows are really expressed right there, right? And you've seen me at my highest and my lowest with respect to that. And we are still maintaining trust.
More the highest than anything else.
And so you're aware of the fact that I've been traveling around the world, and I brought you up to speed on some conversation. I referred to the fact that we've been having some conversation, but this is the first time I'm revealing to you what that conversation is. And it's something that opens with a very broad question. And so what I wanted to do was the beginning of this conversation, the very sort of first question I have for you. I wanted to ask you, when you see this question, what's your response? What does it make you think of?
Is there enough of what? Is it people? Is it work? Is it compassion? There's so many questions out there that simple question brings to my mind. So is there enough is a broad question, and it could be interpreted in every single way possible.
Yeah, it's a very interesting factor that I would say 99 times out of 100 that I've had this conversation, it's been more than 1,000 conversations for sure. It seems, my experience is, people will say enough what? And I say, you tell me. And I didn't even have to do that in your case, because you started telling yourself, because you started taking yourself into different applications of that broad question. And what I began to discover is that people are somewhat in their responses, this is not my intention of this conversation, but somewhat in their responses, they're narrating through their own sense of values, which is a surprise.
I was going to say, if there is enough opportunities for everyone up there, that was my first thought that crossed my mind. But once again, it's a very broad question.
So this is very interesting. So you said the thing that you went to was that, are there enough opportunities? And you're at a place of transition professionally, as I've come to know you. And so you're looking for where your opportunities are. And so there are not enough yet, at least the opportunities that you're looking for that match what you want and need. And therefore, you know, there's certainly, when we look at this question of is there enough, I discovered there are things there are not enough of, and there are things there are enough of. Some things that there are too much, perhaps, right? And it's very much a conditional and situational conversation, right? So my question to you is, now further from the is there enough question, is what is there enough of in your enough list? And it could be things that you've had enough like this, or it could just be things you're merely satisfied. When I ask you, what fits in your enough bucket?
Well, your question is, what is enough out there? And nowadays there is enough negativity. And I said, because at some point I have to stop watching the news and everything related to politics and COVID related situations. So yes, there is enough negativity out there. Personally, that's how I see not just where I live, not just my country right now, which is the US, but also I have friends all over the world. And when I talk to them, hey, how are you? The first thing that they brought in is the negative things that they are experiencing. And let me explain this to you, Daniel. You can right now hop in the plane with your family and have the best trip ever, the best trip of your life. And then you come back to whether it's US or Canada, you're driving from the airport and you have a flat tire and it's raining and it's a storm and you have to be sitting there waiting for help. Then once you get home, your best friend will call you and ask you, how was your trip? And the first thing that you're gonna say, oh, let me tell you how horrible it was coming back from the airport. You forget about all the great things that you experienced with your family and all those 15 days that you truly enjoy and you're having so much fun with all of them, friends, family, whatever. But you always bring that bad experience first. And it happens in marriages too. You could be the best dad in the world, the best husband. And
you left the dishes on the corner over there and didn't do it.
And one little thing, here we go. So
because and let's face it, that's also an example of a not enough, right? Within that, right? In that moment, the dishes not being done was not enough. I've experienced that in relationships as well. One of the things that I find really fascinating about your background, and where were you born?
I was born in Colombia, South America.
Right. So you're born in Colombia, which, let's face it, is a entire history and country that has a lot of relationship from a philosophical and a spiritual standpoint to the United States in terms of its constitution and everything, right?
Absolutely.
And now you live in the United States, and so you have these different cultures, and of course you've amassed, from your professional work and everything else, and your multiculturalism yourself of your identity, you have people all over the world, and you're validating something that I've seen as well, because in 2019, I was in 22 countries having the conversation I'm having with you now. And I found a consistency of essentially, I think that basically every country is at war with itself, culturally, at least. At least we're not throwing bombs. It's not as bad as World War II, but we definitely have a culture war going on all over the world. And I wonder if what you're pointing out about, we see the thing on the side of the road that's the accident, and we pay attention to that more than, the nice conversation we're having in the car analogy, is that we're so focused on solving problems, and there's so much information, and we're so busy and all of these things. We look at everything that's wrong because we want to fix things. We don't necessarily take time to smell the roses or regard the things that are already working, which
Correct.
starts to fill into our media as well, because what do we look at on the news is the stuff that's not working. Good news is very rare, and I think we're hungry for it, because there are some good news efforts that have occurred, like the guy from The Office, Krasinski, who started a good news channel just as a lark, and it turned out to be a huge hit. So I think there's a real desire amongst a lot of people like yourself, like myself, for an appetite for things that are working to try to build on those. The other side of the coin, there's enough negativity. I got that. And so the things that there are not enough of, besides opportunities, compassion, I think you said, right? What else is there not enough of?
I'll probably will say understanding of not just individuals, but like you said before, different cultures, and that is not enough, Dan. And I can speak for myself, coming from a small third world country and going to a college here in the U.S. I was a little shocked, being exposed to different cultures. I was a little introverted, not because of my personality. It was because I wasn't given the opportunity to hang out or just basically get to learn different individuals, because they're coming from different backgrounds.
Right. So the identity of you coming in as a foreigner or whatever aspect, and the people who grew up there, there's a distinction, a difference that's seen as an us and them kind of thing.
And the way, the food that we eat, the way we dress, that was the first thing I was judging people for. Remember, I did my college in Colombia, and I was conditioned to see everyday women taking classes at 6 o'clock in the morning, dressing beautifully. I mean, for them, beauty was above anything else. And then you go here and take a class at 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock, and they come in sweats and their pajamas, their hair is all over. I'm like, what is going on here?
Right.
And
that's wrong by that background. That's wrong.
Correct. So there is not enough understanding, being exposed to different cultures. And I believe it just so happened that you mentioned, that part before. And I always have thought about it, people need to understand, or take the time to understand where we come from. Where you come from, coming from Canada, where I come from, coming from Colombia, and other individuals. You have different beliefs, and you've been raised by different cultures, which they have great things and some of them not so great things, religion-wise, and we can go on and expand, but it's what makes up individuals, right? The culture of their background. I believe it's not enough understanding of where you come from, where I come from, and others come from. Once we get to know that, or at least show some interest in knowing that, I believe things will be different, because I went through that process. And I'm like, oh, let me understand why this individual that comes from, it doesn't really matter, Europe somewhere, it's so funny. Every time I interact with them, they're to the point. They're not warm and cozy. So I'm like, they're so rude. No, they're not rude. They're just straight to the point. They're actually fun people. And I always had that perception about Europeans when I went to college. And later on, one of my greatest customers that I have, was people from Asia, Europe, because they are straightforward shooters, great to do business with those individuals. So yes, we have to spend time learning the cultural background of individuals. So I believe it's not enough of that in a lot of individuals in the world.
It's so well articulated, so interesting from your unique perspective, because typically when I'm having this conversation with someone, we've come to some semblance of what there's enough of, what there's not enough of, a recognition that it's kind of a starting point of conversation to ask, right? There's no time where somebody ever walked into your office, let's say the first time I walked into your office, and we could have done business together without some questions going back and forth. There has to be curiosity. What's your situation? What's the bank's situation? So on and so forth, right? It's a normal course of business, right? And I'm often asking people, once we discover what there's not enough of, which are the things we value the most, right? Is, okay, what do we do about it? What do we do about the not enoughs? What did you do in that situation when you were finding yourself dealing with people that you'd previously judged? You had an interest, an incentive to be able to bridge those prejudgments to try to make some agreement. What is the discovery, I think, essentially over some, incremental 30 years of work that I've done, is to realize that the wealth that you and I have created together, because there's aspects of our relationship that I have survived by and prospered by, and that you have survived by and prospered by, came out of the fact that we developed, for whatever reason, whatever institutions we were part of, but we developed some aspect of agreement that allowed us to do more with less. And I guess if you were to ask me, and now I ask you, do you think there's enough agreement in the world? I think I know your answer, from what you just described.
Correct.
Right? And so my question to you is, if you were to ask, I'm somewhat, of course, giving you answers in the sense, because we're just having a back and forth conversation. I'm sharing my point of view, you're sharing yours. But I guess the question that I'm putting to you and to people we represent that are not on this call is to say, if we had more agreement happening in the world, would things be better?
The answer is absolutely, undoubtedly, yes.
And if that's true, and see, everywhere I've been in the world where I've proposed the idea that wealth, prosperity, and survival is created by agreement, not by resources, everyone's nodded their head. And yet, do we have much agreement in the world? If we all know and recognize the obviousness, right? And then we say it's not what you know, it's who you know. What does that mean? Who you know isn't just who you know, but whether you have agreement with who you know, right? So if that's really the case, why are we so bad at agreement? And my proposition to you is that we are 70,000 years of war that have been bred in us to see us and them. Right, to not know that there's enough to go around. We've assumed, you obviously went to school in economics. Do you remember the first line of economics? Allocation of scarce resources. Economics is the study of the allocation of scarce resources, as if scarce resources are like gravity. It's just there. But that's not actually the reality. I'm not obviously saying that we don't have a shortage and scarcity problem with some people, because we have inequality. We have lack of access, which is lack of agreement for everybody to have access, right? So what our choice is, and this is an accidental conversation off my professional work, which I think you know, and we're not necessarily talking about here, but is also for the purpose from a impact investment side to make the world work for 100% of humanity. But in order for any of those ideas to work, we have to have agreement to change, to make those new ideas work, right? An innovator out in the forest who can't get agreement with an investor is just going to be an innovator out in the forest, right? So I think the proposal we're putting forth within the campaign that's related to this question, is there enough, is can we put agreement over war? Can we suggest, just like you had to like find agreement just to make agreement in order to do business with that Asian business person or with me or with anyone else, you had to like, hey, how's the weather today? And how's, you know, it had to be the simple, small stuff. And so the simple, small stuff that we're starting with is an agreement to make an agreement, to make agreement like a credo. You said, you know, we leave the trip and we, you know, we're worried about the flat tire. We don't sort of, you know, bless the thing that actually took place. Agreement is sometimes like an American Trump supporter, an American non-Trump supporter, in theory, could, like the way they recite the Pledge of Allegiance, they could get together and go, you know, we're both Americans. And then let's talk about all the stuff we disagree on, right? A couple that are fighting can go, we love each other and we have children together or whatever it is. Now let's talk about the stuff. You know, we skip past that because it seems so obvious and we're so busy. Like I said, we're problem solvers, so we don't stop to bless that. So our proposal in this is that after war is when treaties happen, and treaties and after war, post-war is when all of our economic boom is. We're kind of in a world war now, right? In terms of scrambling.
I agree.
The world, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so when the post-war is going to be a treaty, we're proposing that the post-war treaty now is by people, not by nations. Because nations will continue to go to war as long as there are people at war. If the people are not at war, the nations don't have to go to war. So we're proposing a treaty. It's going to launch in 2021.
Interesting.
And this treaty will be affirmed and adopted and engaged with by individuals who are going to be individuals doing on behalf of humanity, not necessarily their brotherhood nationhood, but more their brotherhood humanity. Not to leave out womanhood, it's just a use of the term, right? But if our theory is that if we can get 100 million people to adopt this treaty, we can make agreement over war the credo of humanity. We'll launch this in 2021, in June, and our plan is, and we think we have a strategy that will prove works or not, but we think we have a strategy that can get us 1 million signers of that treaty by the end of 2021.
Is it going to be a worldwide experience, or you're going to start in different regions or countries or selected areas? Then, what's the scope of this First Star project?
Because of the broad travel that I did in 2019 and the seeds that were planted of people, it's not online. It hasn't had social media or that sort of thing yet. At the time of recording this interview, that's soon to start. There's several hundred pieces of content that have been prepared, ready to flood social media and so on. But in answer to your question about where it's going to be located, the idea is that it's located on the planet. Okay. It's a humanity question, right? This question of is there enough is a survival question for humanity. Is there enough for all of us? 100% of humanity, which is also the focus.
Can I comment on something quickly? And sorry for
absolutely.
It just crossed my mind. You know, it's the way it's being organized. I think it's great, and the reason why I just want to comment on this is because I see it like, in order to change the world, because the whole idea is to change the world for better, right?
Yes.
It has to come within us, right? First, right. You start changing yourself, then you change I changed my home, the individuals closest to me, then my friends, then the community, then the cities, then the country, and eventually continents in the world. So I agree with that. It has to be a more like inward kind of like a strategy than to hope that the leaders from whether it's countries, companies, they will send that message out there, because this is not a mission. This is more like it has to come from within us, right? And then we will have to have the responsibility to like, after having conversations like this, like at some point down the road, I'll be speaking to somebody else, and I have a better opinion, or better, like, because I agree to what you're saying.
Well, here's the surprise part of this conversation. So what I intended to do when I started this conversation was to prove that it was possible for people whose opinions don't agree to find agreement anyway. I had a social research agenda to prove this a few years back when this started, and I was successful at doing that. I was successful at getting agreement with people that I would never have agreement with without this approach. But the thing that I didn't see coming was that every time I pose this question or interact with this question in some manner, right? When you think of interact, I could draw a painting, I could talk to somebody else about it, I can think about it in a contemplative way, I can engage in activity that helps me go through it. The discovery that I found, and again, consistently in 22 countries, is that people ended up having a conversation with themselves about their values. And each time that you ask this question, is there enough? And each situation and condition you pointed to, and the three words, is there enough, is not the point. It's more the point of the question mark, because when I would ask it in the sphere of my business, I'm going to ask it in a different way. If I was in the sphere of my relationship, it would be like, is there enough for all of us, or both of us, or however many people in relationship? In the case of our business, we say, how can we find 3.5 trillion of the deficit that now exists to invest in the future of humanity to meet the sustainable development goals of the United Nations? That's, is there enough? That question, right? And so my invitation to you or somebody else as well engaged in the conversation is, there are other ways other than this conversation we're having to re-engage and experience in more detail the power of what this conversation has. And one of them, like I'm doing with you, is to pose the question and ask someone else. When I listen to you, I have a whole new perspective on it that I didn't get just thinking about it myself. So we've even created a game, if you will. I mean, you could think of the treaty as a game too. Can we get 100 million people to align, right? That's a game. We'll either pull it off or not, right? Well, there's another game that's much smaller and much more incremental, of what we call a social researcher. I didn't know I was performing social research when I was first starting with this, because it was very accidental how I ended up having this conversation. But we set up a kind of a game where somebody would go out and ask this question to 10 other people. And if they complete that and come back and report to us what they learned, it's not for us to report on each single one of the 10, but more for what happened to the researcher in the process, for them to come back and tell us, what more did you learn about the impact of this question compared to the first time you heard it by posing it to somebody else? You hear negative people, positive people, however you want to, people from this culture and that culture. There are similarities and there are distinctions. And through that compare and contrast, there's a depth of understanding that begins to continue. And it helps you to even get more in touch with your own personal values. And I asked a friend of mine once recently in the last month, I said, is there a value in helping people understand their own values? And he said, yeah. He answered it this way. You say, hell yeah. He answered it in this way. He said, I don't know if there's a higher value than that, but it's certainly a value, right?
Absolutely. I'm telling you, if we go that route, you're going to be questioning yourself at some point. After you speak to, like you said before, 4 or 5 people, you'd be like, interesting. If we're gonna take the route of, values, because that is a very interesting topic, right? But
It is.
in general, it's what's good and what's bad, and it should narrow into those, into those little 2 answers.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, it's like, that's the values of the individual, doing good for other individuals, or doing good
Or for yourself. Or for yourself.
For yourself.
Yeah. You could be totally selfish with this information, completely selfish, and you wouldn't be hurting anybody else either in doing so. You wouldn't have to take from anybody else, because when you really ask the question behind, is there enough, the one that follows, which is, what are you going to do about it? Whatever your vision is that you're going to do is going to require agreement to get there, that you don't have now, or you'd already have it, right? Like if you're looking for an opportunity, you have not identified the opportunity and then made agreement with a contract for that opportunity. Therefore, it has not yet happened. No matter what way you define the history up to this point, your responsibility, your response to the situation, your responsibility is based on whether you can get new agreement that you have not had previously. So our focus is, because what we're doing from a professional side, from an impact investment side, is very massive and requires a lot of change. We discovered that we need a whole lot of agreement in order to make that change happen. Otherwise, we wouldn't even be having this conversation if it had been that easy. So we're kind of like the Agreement Academy. And the reason we are is because when you get in touch with your own values higher than you knew them yesterday, let's say, on a relational basis, right? A little bit better today than yesterday. Each day that you do, you become more compassionate about someone else's values. And you don't have to change somebody's opinion in order to get agreement. That's what we think agreement is, getting you to see my side. That's not agreement that we're talking about from a survival, wealth, and prosperity standpoint. Agreement that we're talking about is, you hold on to your opinions and I'm going to hold on to mine. But do we have some values in between those that we can mine through? It's kind of like crypto mining, but it's human mining for agreement. So all the things that we're doing in the conversation campaign is really just all about that. And this video that you've allowed us to do together is for the same purpose, so that when people watch this and engage with this and think about this, some of them will relate more to you, some of them will relate more to me, but ultimately they're going to have some discussion with themselves if they've watched all the way through what we've just talked about in order for us to get here. So I want to thank you for the agreement that we had to come on this conversation to do this. And I hope it leads to many more agreements we continue to have.
It's always a pleasure, Dan. It's always, and every time we talk, and it's just, it makes you think differently, right? It's just a great way to reflect on, life in general. It's a great proposition that you have up there, and I'm sure it will catch the attention of a lot of individuals. You have to stop for 1 second and think. That question seems to be, is that enough? Seems to be a simple question, but if you want to answer that question right on the spot as you're speaking, then you realize it's not an easy question. It's just it can go in so many directions, but then you have to start narrowing them down just to understand. It's like a peeling the onion, right? You ask the why. What's the problem here? Why? Why is it? Until you get to the core of the onion, and that makes you realize that that's basically what is important for you, for me as an individual.
Well, I will wrap it up with 2 comments to that. I referred to a friend of mine that I asked about what is the value of helping people find their own values, and he's a frequent advisor of mine over the couple of years that this has, been developing. Very even keel guy, doesn't like politics or government, but considers what we're doing a very unique expression of self-governing. So he's almost an anarchist, but a peaceful one. Just doesn't like any government at all, but he really loves and embraces what it is that we're doing of empowering people to govern themselves in a slightly different way than they do now. And I recall I was once at an event in Boston and he was sitting in the audience and he'd heard about this conversation 6 months before. And at the end, everybody was sort of like, it's so interesting. What do we do with this? And so on. And he raised his hand and he said, look, I heard this conversation 6 months ago. And he said, I never said anything, but I went home that night and I sat up at night in my bed. And he said, I thought about all the things that there's enough of and all the things there's not enough of. And I realized that a lot of things that I think there's not enough of, there really are. And some of the things that there are not enough of, they're really not. Right? But it helped me relax about some of the things that I was building up as issues that are really not issues, right? If there's not enough leadership, okay, I can exercise some, right? If I don't like the politicians in the government, I can run for office or I can find what, there's always something you can do provided you have this magic skill of agreement, because if you have that, there's no limit to anything you have, which basically brings me to this idea, because you said it's a very simple question. It's a very big question. And then you kind of have to narrow it down. I think all of transformation, personal development, growth, evolution of humanity, improvement of life, more prosperity for all, more survival for all of that you could really classify in one way or another as transformation. We're not the same human race that we were 100 years ago. We have transformed, right? So we're an ongoing experiment in transformation. And I think as I look back on my life, I've been involved in transformation in one way or another for about 30 years now. From training to media to technology, all those careers have been about transformation. And a lot of the focus of transformation has been on raising awareness, people becoming more conscious. And when things are not working, I've heard from people in the transformation business, so to speak, leaders, trainers, writers, thinkers. Well, not everybody is aware. We have to sort of raise consciousness, because when things are not working, it's because we don't have enough awareness. I know, but the others don't. This is the awareness conversation. Ultimately, you look at it in climate change, right? I'm a climate reality trained leader by Al Gore. All my, tens of thousands of brother and sister leaders around the planet are doing a good job of raising awareness of the impact of climate change in places where people have not understood it, and probably saving lives as a result of it. So awareness is really, really important. But there's another part of transformation that comes after awareness, and that's demonstration. There are people who will not believe you no matter how much awareness you raise. But when the evidence is in front of their eyes, they can't deny it. Real transformation is not just possibility, it's also the demonstration. When we ask the question, is there enough? We're starting down an economic path of possibility. And I say it's economic. It's economic, and therefore it's about justice, because economics is all about justice, because it's all about who gets to have and who does not in our present world, which is why it's about justice. Martin Luther King made this perfectly clear at the end of his life. He was just beginning to move into social economic justice at the end of his life, not color as much, right? He was evolving in this direction. And that if you pose this question from a place of economic justice and possibility, then the demonstration comes down to, how do you build more wealth, not money, of which money is a big part of it, but actual wealth? And then how do you have more people be included in it? And that requires lots of demonstration. So what we're doing in this campaign is then directing, encouraging, feeding, if you will, audience attention to other organizations besides ourselves who are really demonstrating out there. People are doing food programs, who are doing mass distribution, who are raising awareness themselves, teaching awareness, whatever it is, because our audience is, even the ones we've had just in this market research we've done up to this point before we go online in a big way in 2021, are all people going, wow, you've woken me up. What do I do with this information? So these games that we play, this video, going out and being a social researcher, signing the treaty, these are all forms of demonstration. So we can go from the big possibility question to, this is something I can actually do.